Principles of the Church Social Doctrine, Part 2. Fourth, the principle of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is among the most constant characteristic directives of the Church Social Doctrine and has been present since the first great social encyclical. It is impossible to promote the dignity of the person without showing concerns for the family, groups, associations, local territorial realities, in short, for that aggregate of economic, social, cultural, sports-oriented, recreational, professional, and political expressions to which people spontaneously give life and which make it possible for them to achieve effective social growth. This is the realm of civil society, understood as the sum of the relationships between individuals and intermediate social groupings, which are the first relationships to arise and which come about thanks to the creative subjectivity of the citizen. This network of relationships strengthens the social fabric and constitutes the basis of a true community of persons, making possible the recognition of higher forms of social activity. The necessity of defending and promoting the original expressions of social life is emphasized by the Church in the encyclical Quadragesimo Anno, in which the principle of subsidiarity is indicated as a most important principle of social philosophy. Just as it is gravely wrong to take from individuals what they can accomplish by their own initiative and industry and give it to the community, so also it is an injustice and at the same time a grave evil and disturbance of right order to assign to a greater and higher association what lesser and subordinate organizations can do. For every social activity ought of its very nature to furnish help to the members of the body social and never destroy and absorb them. On the basis of this principle, all societies of a superior order must adopt attitudes of help, subsidium, therefore of support, promotion, development with respect to lower order societies. In this way, intermediate social entities can properly perform the functions that falls to them without being required to hand them over unjustly to other social entities of a higher level, by which they would end up being absorbed and substituted in the end, seeing themselves denied their dignity and essential place. Subsidiarity, understood in the positive sense as economic, institutional, or juridical assistance offered to lesser social entities, entails a corresponding series of negative implications that require the state to refrain from anything that would de facto restrict the existential space of the smaller essential cells of society. Their initiative, freedom, and responsibility must not be supplanted. The principle of subsidiarity protects people from abuses by higher level social authority and calls on these same authorities to help individuals and intermediate groups to fulfill their duties. This principle is imperative because every person, family, and intermediate group has something original to offer to the community. Experience shows that the denial of subsidiarity or its limitation in the name of an alleged democratization or equality of all members of society limits and sometimes even destroys the spirit of freedom and initiative. The principle of subsidiarity is opposed to certain forms of centralization, bureaucratization, and welfare assistance, and to the unjustified and excessive presence of the state in public mechanisms. By intervening directly and depriving society of its responsibility, the social assistance state leads to a loss of human energies, an inordinate increase of public agencies, which are dominated more by bureaucratic ways of thinking than by concern for serving their clients, and which are accompanied by an enormous increase in spending, an absence of insufficient recognition of private initiative in economic matters also, and the failure to recognize its public function contribute to the undermining of the principle of subsidiarity, as monopolies do as well. In order for the principle of subsidiarity to be put into practice, there is a corresponding need for respect and effective promotion of the human person and the family, ever greater appreciation of associations and intermediate organizations in their fundamental choices, and in those that cannot be delegated to or exercised by others, the encouragement of private initiative so that every social entity remains at the service of the common good, each with its own distinctive characteristics, the presence of pluralism in society, and due representation of its vital components, safeguarding human rights and the rights of minorities, bringing about bureaucratic and administrative decentralization, striking a balance between the public and private spheres, with the resulting recognition of the social function of the private sphere, appropriate methods for making citizens more responsible in actively being a part of the political and social reality of their country. Various circumstances may make it advisable that the state step in to supply certain functions. One may think, for example, of situations in which it is necessary for the state itself to stimulate the economy because it is impossible for civil society to support initiatives on its own. One may also envision the reality of serious social imbalance or injustice where only the intervention of the public authority can create conditions of greater equality, justice, and peace. In light of the principle of subsidiarity, however, this institutional substitution must not continue any longer than is absolutely necessary, since justification for such intervention is found only in the exceptional nature of the situation. In any case, the common good correctly understood, the demands of which will never in any way be contrary to the defense and promotion of the primacy of the person, and the way this is expressed in society must remain the criteria for making decisions concerning the application of the principle of subsidiarity. Fifth, participation. The characteristic implication of subsidiarity is participation, which is expressed essentially in a series of activities by means of which the citizen, either as an individual or in association with others, whether directly or through representation, contributes to the cultural, economic, political, and social life of the civil community to which he belongs. Participation is a duty to be fulfilled consciously by all, with responsibility and with a view to the common good. This cannot be confined or restricted to only a certain area of social life, given its importance for growth, above all human growth, in areas such as the world of work and economic activity, especially in their eternal dynamics, in the sectors of information and culture, and more than anything else, in the fields of social and political life, even at the highest levels. The cooperation of all peoples and the building of an international community in a framework of solidarity depends on this latter area. In this perspective, it becomes absolutely necessary to encourage participation above all of the most disadvantaged, as well as the occasional rotation of political leaders in order to forestall the establishment of hidden privileges. Moreover, a strong moral pressure is needed so that the administration of public life will be the result of the shared responsibility of each individual with regard to the common good. Participation in community life is not only one of the greatest aspirations of the citizen, called to exercise freely and responsibly his civic role with and for others, but is also one of the pillars of all democratic orders and one of the major guarantees of the permanence of the democratic system. Democratic government, in fact, is defined first of all by the assignment of powers and functions on the part of the people, exercised in their name, in their regard, and on their behalf. It is therefore clearly evident that every democracy must be participative. This means that the different subjects of civil community at every level must be informed, listened to, and involved in the exercise of the carried out functions. Participation can be achieved in all the different relationships between the citizen and institutions. To this end, particular attention must be given to the historical and social context in which such participation can truly be brought about. The overcoming of cultural, juridical, and social obstacles that often constitutes real barriers to the shared participation of citizens in the destiny of their communities calls for work in the areas of information and education. In this regard, all those attitudes that encourage in citizens an inadequate or incorrect practice of participation, or that cause widespread disaffection with everything connected with the sphere of social and political life, are a source of concern and deserve careful consideration. For example, one thinks of attempts by certain citizens to make deals with institutions in order to obtain more advantageous conditions for themselves, as though these institutions were at the service of their selfish needs or of the practice of citizens to limit their participation to the electoral process, in many cases reaching the point where they even abstain from voting. In the area of participation, a further source of concern is found in those countries ruled by totalitarian or dictatorial regimes, where the fundamental right to participate in public life is denied at its origin, since it is considered a threat to the state itself. In some countries, where this right is only formally proclaimed, while in reality it cannot be concretely exercised, while in still other countries, the burgeoning bureaucracy de facto denies citizens the possibility of taking active part in social and political life. Sixth, the principle of solidarity. Solidarity highlights in a particular way the intrinsic social nature of the human person, the equality of all in dignity and rights, and the common path of individuals and peoples towards an ever more committed unity. Never before has there been such a widespread awareness of the bond of interdependence between individuals and peoples, which is found at every level. The very rapid expansion in ways and means of communication in real time, such as those offered by informing technology, the extraordinary advances in computer technology, the increased volume of commerce and information exchange, all bear witness to the fact that for the first time since the beginning of human history, it is now possible, at least technologically, to establish relationships between people who are separated by great distances and are unknown to each other. In the presence of the phenomenon of interdependence and its constant expansion, however, There persist in every part of the world stark inequalities between developed and developing countries. Inequalities stoked also by various forms of exploitation, oppression, and corruption that have a negative influence on the internal and international life of many states. The acceleration of interdependence between persons and peoples needs to be accompanied by equally intense efforts on the ethical social plane in order to avoid the dangerous consequences of perpetrating injustice on a global scale. This would have been negative repercussions even in the very countries that are presently more advantaged. The new relationships of interdependence between individuals and peoples, which are de facto forms of solidarity, have to be transformed into relationships tending towards genuine ethical social solidarity. This is a moral requirement inherent within all human relationships. Solidarity is seen, therefore, under two complementary aspects, that of a social principle and that of a moral virtue. Solidarity must be seen above all in its value as a moral virtue that determines the order of institutions. On the basis of this principle, the structures of sin that dominates relationships between individuals and peoples must be overcome. They must be purified and transformed into structures of solidarity through the creation or appropriate modification of laws, market regulations, and juridical systems. Solidarity is also an authentic moral virtue, not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, both near and far. On the contrary, it is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is to say, to the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all. Solidarity rises to the rank of fundamental social virtue, since it places itself in the sphere of justice. It is a virtue directed par excellence to the common good, and is found in a commitment to the good of one's neighbor with a readiness in the gospel sense to lose oneself for the sake of other instead of exploiting him, and to serve him instead of oppressing him for one's own advantage. Our reference, Matthew chapter 10, verses 40 to 42, chapter 20, verse 25, Mark chapter 10, verses 42 to 45, Luke chapter 22, verses 25 to 27. The message of the Church social doctrine regarding solidarity clearly shows that there exists an intimate bond between solidarity and the common good, between solidarity and the universal destination of goods, between solidarity and equality among men and peoples, between solidarity and peace in the world. The term solidarity, widely used by the magisterium, expresses in summary fashion the need to recognize in the composite ties that unite men and social groups among themselves the space given to human freedom for common growth, in which all share and in which they participate. The commitment to this goal is translated into the positive contribution of seeing that nothing is lacking in the common cause, and also of seeking points of possible agreement where attitudes of separation and fragmentation prevail. It translates into the willingness to give oneself for the good of one's neighbor beyond any individual or particular interest. The principle of solidarity requires that men and women of our day cultivate a greater awareness that they are debtors of the society of which they have become part. They are debtors because of those conditions that make human existence livable, and because of the indivisible and indispensable legacy constituted by culture, scientific and technical knowledge, material and immaterial goods, and by all that the human condition has produced. A similar depth must be recognized in the various forms of social interaction so that humanity's journey will not be interrupted but remain open to present and future generations, all of them called together to share the same gift in solidarity. The unsurpassed apex of the perspective indicated here is the life of Jesus of Nazareth, the new man, who is one with humanity even to the point of death on a cross. In him, it is always possible to recognize the living sign of that measureless and transcendent love of God with us, who takes on the infirmities of his people, walks with them, saves them, and makes them one. In him and thanks to him, life in society too, despite all its contradictions and ambiguities, can be rediscovered as a place of life and hope, in that it is a sign of grace that is continuously offered to all, and because it is an invitation to ever higher and more involved forms of sharing. Jesus of Nazareth makes the connection between solidarity and charity shine brightly before all, illuminating the entire meaning of this connection. In the light of faith, solidarity seeks to go beyond itself, to take on the specifically Christian dimensions of total gratuity, forgiveness, and reconciliation. One's neighbor is then not only a human being with his or her own rights and a fundamental equality with everyone else, but becomes the living image of God the Father, redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ and placed under the permanent action of the Holy Spirit. One's neighbor must therefore be loved, even if an enemy, with the same love with which the Lord loves him or her, and for that person's sake, one must be ready for sacrifice, even the ultimate one, to lay down one's life for the brethren. Our reference, 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. Seventh, the fundamental values of social life. Besides the principles that must guide the building of a society worthy of man, the Church social doctrine also indicates fundamental values. The relationship between principles and values is undoubtedly one of the reciprocity, in that social values are an expression of appreciation to be attributed to those specific aspects of moral good that these principles foster, serving as points of reference for the proper structuring and ordered leading of life in society. These values require, therefore, both the practice of the fundamental principles of social life and the personal exercise of virtue, hence of those moral attitudes that correspond to these very values. All social values are inherent in the dignity of the human person, whose authentic development they foster. Essentially, these values are truth, freedom, justice, love. Putting them into practice is the sure and necessary way of obtaining personal perfection and a more human social existence. They constitute the indispensable point of reference for public authorities called to carry out substantial reforms of economic, political, cultural, and technological structures and the necessary changes in institutions. Respect for the legitimate autonomy of earthly realities prompts the Church not to claim a specific competence of a technical or temporal order, but it does not prevent her from intervening to show how, in the different choices made by men and women, these values are either affirmed or denied. Men and women have the specific duty to move always towards the truth, to respect it and bear responsible witness to it. Living in the truth has a special significance in social relationships. In fact, when the coexistence of human beings within a community is founded on truth, it is ordered and fruitful, and it corresponds to their dignity as persons. The more people and social groups strive to resolve social problems according to the truth, the more they distance themselves from abuses and act in accordance with objective demands of morality. Modern times call for an intensive educational effort and a corresponding commitment on the part of all so that the quest for truth cannot be ascribed to the sum of different opinions, nor to one or another of these opinions, will be encouraged in every sector and will prevail over every attempt to relativize its demands or to offend it. This is an issue that involves the role of public communications and that of the economy in a particular way. In these areas, the unscrupulous use of money raises ever more pressing questions which necessarily call for greater transparency and honesty in personal and social activity. Freedom is the highest sign in man of his being made in the divine image and consequently is a sign of sublime dignity of every human person. Freedom is exercised in relationships between human beings. Every human person created in the image of God has the natural right to be recognized as a free and responsible being. All owe to each other this duty of respect. The right to the exercise of freedom, especially in moral and religious matters, is an inalienable requirement of the dignity of the human person. The meaning of freedom must not be restricted, considering it from a purely individualistic perspective and reducing it to the arbitrary and uncontrolled exercise of one's own personal autonomy. Far from being achieved in total self-sufficiency and the absence of relationships, freedom only truly exists where reciprocal bonds governed by truth and justice link people to one another. The understanding of freedom becomes deeper and broader when it is defended, even at the social level, in all its various dimensions. The value of freedom as an expression of the singularity of its human person is respected when every member of society is permitted to fulfill his personal vocation, to seek the truth and profess his religious, cultural, and political ideas, to express his opinions, to choose his state of life, and as far as possible, his line of work, to pursue initiatives of an economic, social, or political nature. This must take place within a strong juridical framework, within the limits imposed by the common good and public order, and in every case, in a manner characterized by responsibility. On the other hand, freedom must also be expressed as the capacity to refuse what is morally negative, in whatever guise it may be presented, as the capacity to distance oneself effectively from everything that could hinder personal, family, or social growth. The fullness of freedom consists in the capacity to be in possession of oneself in view of the genuine good within the context of the universal common good. Justice is a value that accompanies the exercise of the corresponding cardinal moral virtue. According to its most classic formulation, it consists in the constant and firm will to give their clue to God and neighbor. From a subjective point of view, justice is translated into behavior that is based on the will to recognize the other as a person, while from an objective point of view, it constitutes the decisive criteria of morality in the intersubjective and social sphere. The Church social magisterium constantly calls for the most classical forms of justice to be respected: commutative, distributive, and legal justice. Ever greater importance has been given to social justice, which represents a real development in general justice, the justice that regulates social relationship according to the criterion of observance of the law. Social justice, a requirement related to the social question which today is worldwide in scope, concerns the social, political, and economic aspects, and above all, the structural dimension of problems and their respective solutions. Justice is particularly important in the present-day context where the individual value of the person, his dignity and his rights, despite proclaimed intentions, are seriously threatened by the widespread tendency to make exclusive use of criteria of utility and ownership. Justice, too, on the basis of this criteria, is considered in a reductionist manner, whereas it acquires a fuller and more authentic meaning in Christian anthropology. Justice, in fact, is not merely a simple human convention, because what is just is not first determined by the law, but by the profound identity of the human being. The full truth about man makes it possible to move beyond a contractualistic vision of justice, which is a reductionist vision, and to open up also for justice the new horizon of solidarity and love. By itself, justice is not enough. Indeed, it can even betray itself unless it is open to that deeper power which is love. In fact, the church social doctrine places alongside the value of justice that of solidarity, in that it is the prevalent way of peace. If peace is the fruit of justice, today one could say, with the same exactness and the same power of biblical inspiration, our reference, Isaiah chapter 32, verse 17, James chapter 3, verse 18. Opus solidaritas pax, peace as the fruit of solidarity, the goal of peace, in fact, will certainly be achieved through the putting into effect of social and international justice, but also through the practice of the virtues which favor togetherness and which teach us to live in unity, so as to build in unity by giving and receiving a new society and a better world. 8. The way of love. Among the virtues in their entirety, and in particular between virtues, social values, and love, there exists a deep bond that must be ever more fully recognized. Love, often restricted to relationship of physical closeness or limited to merely subjective aspects of action on behalf of others, must be reconsidered in its authentic value as the highest and universal criterion of the whole of social ethics. Among all paths, even those sought and taken in order to respond to the ever new forms of current social questions, the more excellent way. Our reference, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31, is that marked out by love. It is from the inner wellspring of love that the values of truth, freedom, and justice are born and grow. Human life in society is ordered, bears fruit of goodness, and responds to human dignity when it is founded on truth, when it is lived in justice, that is, in the effective respect of rights and in the fitful carrying out of corresponding duties, when it is animated by selflessness, which makes the needs and requirements of others seem as one's own and intensifies the communion of spiritual values and a concern for material necessities, when it is brought about in the freedom that befits the dignity of men and women, prompted by their rational nature to accept responsibility for their actions. These values constitute the pillars which give strength and consistency to the edifice of life and deeds. They are values that determine the quality of every social action and institution. Love presupposes and transcends justice, which must find its fulfillment in charity. If justice is in itself suitable for arbitration between people concerning the reciprocal distribution of objective goods in an equitable manner, love and only love excluding that kindly love that we call mercy, is capable of restoring man to himself. Human relationships cannot be governed solely by measure of justice. The experience of the past and of our own time demonstrates that justice alone is not enough, that it can even lead to the negation and destruction of itself. It has been precisely historically experienced that, among other things, has led to the formulation of the saying, summum ius, summa injuria. In fact, in every sphere of interpersonal relationships, justice must, so to speak, be corrected to a considerable extent by that love which, as St. Paul proclaims, is patient and kind, or in other words, possesses the characteristics of that merciful love which is so much of the essence of the gospel and Christianity. No legislation, no system of rules or negotiation will ever succeed in persuading men and peoples to live in unity, brotherhood, and peace. No line of reasoning will ever be able to surpass the appeal of love. Only love, in its quality as form of the virtues, can animate and shape social interaction, moving it towards peace in the context of a world that is ever more complex. In order that all this may take place, however, it is necessary that care be taken to show love, not only in its role of prompting individual deeds, but also as a force capable of inspiring new ways of approaching the problems of today's world, of profoundly renewing structures, social organizations, legal systems from within. In this perspective, love takes on the characteristic style of social and political charity. Social charity makes us love the common good. It makes us effectively seek the good of all people, considered not only as individuals or private persons, but also in the social dimension that unites them. Social and political charity is not exhausted in relationships between individuals, but spreads into the network formed by these relationships, which is precisely the social and political community. It intervenes in this context, seeking the greatest good for the community in its entirety. In so many aspects, the neighbor to be loved is found in society, such that to love him concretely, assist him in his needs or in his indigence, may mean something different than it means on the mere level of relationships between individuals. To love him on the social level means, depending on the situations, to make use of social mediations, to improve his life or to remove social factors that cause his indigence. It is undoubtedly an act of love, the work of mercy by which one responds here and now to a real and impelling need of one's neighbor. But it is an equally indispensable act of love to strive to organize and structure society so that one's neighbor will not find himself in poverty. Above all, when this becomes a situation within which an immense number of people and entire populations must struggle, and when it takes on the proportions of a true worldwide social issue.